In the last 10 months, we've gotten two video games that have both suffered in different ways from overmarketing. Deathloop and Cyberpunk, two very different games with two very different rollouts and marketing tactics, despite what some articles might say. One reason why the latter is more successful, huh? Must be something pretty interesting. Ooh, one simple reason why everything was different. Okay, here we go. Deathloop succeeded because it was good. Yeah, games media is, what would we do without it, really? Cyberpunk's rollout was an overly long slog filled with overpromises and an exponentially compounding amount of hype to combat the ridiculous amount of time it was taking for this game to come out. And Deathloop's rollout was compact, but overstuffed with repetition. Instead of giving us unprecedented amounts of information about every nook and cranny of the game like Cyberpunk did, it gave us a barrage of the same small set of information for a full year, making it feel a lot longer than that in doing so. Their methods were different, and as were their outcomes. One soured players on it before it even released, garnering a reputation of that one game that we're tired of seeing, and one disappointed players on release, with so many fans doing a full 180 in just a few days at launch. But in both cases, they displayed just how drastically marketing can affect a product, sometimes more than the actual content of the product itself. I wanted to do a quick case study on both of these games and try to pinpoint where exactly they went wrong, and open up a discussion about whether games like Silksong and Elden Ring, with their large stretches of time where they provide no information whatsoever, are actually doing us a favor. So, let's talk about it. I want to start with the more recent of these two games, Deathloop. In a cruel twist of irony, Deathloop's marketing became a Deathloop in and of itself, a cycle that just continued to endlessly repeat, except unlike the game Deathloop, it didn't feel like you were discovering new information every time that would help you escape. It instead felt like a torture chamber that you couldn't get out of. And it's a real shame because I think both the cinematic reveal trailer for this game as well as the gameplay reveal trailer for it, which were shown a year apart from one another, were amazing. Dude, that PlayStation Showcase trailer is one of the best trailers I've ever seen. The style, the music, the gameplay, the animation, the mystery, this thing was fantastic. And at first, the only thing that you could say about Deathloop's marketing was that it was great and intriguing. And since its reveal was only a year before its initial release date, and its gameplay trailer was only a few months before its release date, the last thing that you'd think about the marketing of this game would be that it's overbloated. And then, the delays hit. Deathloop was repeatedly delayed, eventually launching almost a year after it was first promised. Now, delays are hard to predict and sometimes unavoidable, so the fact that the game got delayed, that's not a serious knock against any game in my opinion. But the real question is, how does the game handle that delay? In Deathloop's case, I think the studio behind it, Inane, was afraid that they'd shown their hand. See, Inane has always made amazing games with arguably the best level design out there, but commercially, their products weren't as successful as they probably should have been. With Deathloop, it felt like they'd created a game that was really uniquely Inane, really experimental, really artistic, but also a game that appealed more to a mainstream audience. It was more high energy, more action focused, it was less a stealth simulator and more a murder playground. And it felt like their early marketing was targeting the mainstream with their trailers, all the while making sure that fans of their other stuff knew that there was a lot more going on under the hood. You can see in the showcase trailer how they just sprinkle in the stuff about the 8 targets and how this might be a thinking man's game into the wider scope of kill, kill, fly, kick, kill. And with release so imminent, that was the right hand to play. Once the delays hit though, the marketing decisions felt like they were ones made out of fear. Inane had finally made a game that they felt could be a real commercial hit, but now they felt like every passing day, Deathloop might fade from people's minds. And what ensued was that every single event ever had a Deathloop trailer. If you look at the Deathloop playlist on Bethesda's YouTube page, you can see that over the course of a year since its reveal, there were 3 promotional videos or events that featured Deathloop. And remember that the third one was only a few short months before the planned release date. The year that followed, however, we had 11 promotional videos for Deathloop, and that was all after we'd gotten most of the meat and potatoes out of the way with these two. Inane's belief that not showing something for a few months would absolutely kill their momentum was misguided, and instead what actually worked against them was losing the balance that they had initially struck with this trailer. The fun factor of Deathloop was perfectly displayed in the showcase trailer. That's where the emphasis clearly was, with the actual "so what exactly do you do" of it all hiding behind that curtain. And I think the two most sensible moves here were either to A, keep the same balance in the trailers but make these trailers very sparse, since otherwise you're just regurgitating information that everyone already knows, or B, do consistent trailers or deep dives but actually flesh out the other part of this game, the complicated parts. It might not be what you originally planned, but also the delays weren't something you originally planned. And it also means that we have more reasons to be interested in the game and its unique properties. Deathloop instead took the worst of both worlds. In the same way that trying to stamp the same area dozens of times leads to a smudging, muddy mess because of all the small shifts in the placements, leaving you wondering what in the world the stamp even said in the first place, Deathloop's marketing made people wonder what they saw in it at its initial reveal. The magic and clarity of this game wore off almost entirely as we were bombarded with multiple versions of the same trailer all too many times, each of which gave us a bit of new information but retreaded so much of the same ground that we were less intrigued and more confused, and also concerned that this game might not be as good as we might have thought. In some trailers, they did try to give examples of how some of this stuff worked, and that was helpful, but they clearly wanted to keep that high energy that previous trailers and even the game itself keeps up, because that to them was where the mainstream appeal came from. And because of that, the most interesting part of the game, its structure, was never actually conveyed to us how it should have been. It was a rushed explanation and didn't actually get into the domino effect nearly well enough. You got so many people reviewing this game saying, yeah, it wasn't what I expected. Everyone assumed it was a roguelike, but then Arcane said, nah, it's not a roguelike, but we were like, how dude, it seems a lot like a roguelike, and turns out, yeah, it's not a roguelike, it's something completely new. But none of us knew that because at no point did they sell us on that in the seemingly infinite attempts they had to do so. Those explanation trailers that I just talked about divulged into the same pitfalls that all the other ones did. And if they had instead pulled them from whatever event they were at and showed a more in-depth explanation that focused on providing information and not being an off-the-wall, speed-infused trailer, it would have stopped feeling like we were seeing this game everywhere, and we would have felt like we had a better understanding of it overall. This is the problem that I have with articles that claim that it lived up to the overhype that Cyberpunk didn't. Deathloop wasn't overhyped, it was overexposed. The same things that we saw from the very beginning were beaten into the ground as other important things were left in the dark, because the game was both too scared of being forgotten and too scared of being too confusing. And it wound up making tons of things about it feel played out before we even saw them in action. Alright, so Deathloop thought that there was a problem where there wasn't, it tried to solve that fake problem, and in doing so it created an actual problem. But Cyberpunk though had a problem, solved that problem in the short term, and absolutely screwed itself with that solution in the long term. Remember when I said that Deathloop's marketing became a Deathloop in and of itself, a sentence that was written yesterday before I saw the girlfriend reviews video where they said the exact same thing but better, but I'm not gonna let that stop me from putting it in here? Yeah, Cyberpunk's marketing also took the shape of the product itself, a modern open world game. Which is to say, it was massive, way too long, filled with drawn out unnecessary segments, and an expert at making you think that there was a lot more to it than there actually was. Cyberpunk was revealed, simply put, way too early. Everyone knows that. I mean, it was revealed 3 years before The Witcher 3 even came out. And since then, the scope of this title was definitely changed. A lot like delays, sometimes announcing something too early isn't necessarily your fault, especially when you're either new to developing games or you're growing at a rate that you don't understand, which CD Projekt Red definitely was once The Wild Hunt came out. The studio was growing so rapidly. It's understandable that the game just kept evolving and they had no hope of pinning down a reasonable release date for something that they had mistakenly made public in a time where they were a much smaller team. But once again, the bigger problem isn't with the situation, but how you handle it. There's a natural void that gets created when you spend forever not giving information about your product, where fans oftentimes overreact to how bad it is to not get anything for so long. The reason I think it's so hard for a studio to know how to deal with this void is because every development process is so vastly different. There's so many variables that you have to account for that you just can't figure out a formula for this all. We'll explore how some other developers handled it in a second here, but as for how CD Projekt Red handled it, it can best be summed up by the phrase, talking themselves to death. I'd argue that there actually wasn't an overabundance of marketing for Cyberpunk as far as proper trailers and major gameplay reveals go, considering just how long this rollout process was. What actually did Cyberpunk in much more was filling in the gaps between the major reveals with nuggets of information pertaining to the AI, the lifestyles, the combat, the skills, the liveliness of the city, etc., all while so much of it was being tweaked and altered at the time. We've seen this before with stuff like Fable or No Man's Sky. Who knows if certain things were actually planned and then later changed, or if the marketing team just thought of something that sounded cool and assumed that the dev team would be able to pull it off. But either way, over-talking and giving so many details in order to satiate people's appetites is almost universally a bad thing. Because while it might make fans more excited in the short term, when they actually play the game, which is the more important part, you may have set yourself up to disappoint those same fans. I was on the Atomic Heart Discord last month looking through some of the developers' Q&As, and I was shocked with how the team was both in the final stretch of development and also still making a couple big decisions on what would exactly be included as mechanics. They've been working on this for so long and feel like they're approaching the end, and still things are not finalized. When you're promoting something that's still a good deal away from releasing, you should always keep your promotion and marketing as broad as you possibly can. The more detailed you get, the more chance you have to shoot yourself in the foot by talking about something that might not actually exist in the game. The void of a long development process is a tough thing to navigate. On the one hand, Cyberpunk screwed itself over by trying to fill in that void as much as possible, and the thing was that fans were actually happy with that at the time. On the other hand, I've talked about games like Little Devil Inside a few times now, who go years not saying anything to anyone, no social media presence, no Kickstarter updates, nothing at Sony events, which is even worse as a crowd-funded game, and clearly that's also a massive problem where fans are mad during the marketing, but maybe they'll be happy when the game finally releases. Being vocal or not won't change how fast your game comes out, and that's something that fans need to realize. Hey, stop waiting for GTA 6 to get revealed, because if they reveal something right now, you're still going equally as long waiting for GTA 6. But it's still good to, once you've revealed something, show actual proof of existence. And this is where I put my somewhat controversial opinion that I think that Silksong is handling this perfectly. I know that everyone's desperate for news on this game, and I know that Team Cherry announced it way too early, but to be fair, by their own admission, it turned into something much bigger than they were anticipating. Sometimes, like I said, you just can't control announcing something too early. But at that point, you gotta grit your teeth, get what you need to get done, and push through some fan backlash on not seeing the game in however long. Team Cherry has done a good job intermittently interacting with fans and letting us know that they haven't disappeared off the face of the earth, and even being kind enough to let people know when they won't be at events that fans are really hoping that they'll be at. And I know some people associate that with, great, another event that they're missing out on, but like I said, their pace is their pace. If they're not ready to show something, it's better that they commit to that and not lead us on. There's been a lot of please don't let this be another Cyberpunk going around in the past year, and it seems like any game that has any delay or long development process has the first comment on its trailer or Reddit be, God, I hope they don't pull a Cyberpunk. But I think some people really misunderstand why Cyberpunk ended up the way it did. It wasn't just because it was announced too early and suffered tons of delays. That happens all the time, even to some really great games. No, its marketing just literally pushed it out the door too fast. It made it seem complete in a way that it never could have been. It made everyone believe things about the state of it that weren't true, and people didn't understand how it could still be taking so long. And overall, I think Cyberpunk is a lesson in the idea that when you're promoting something, sometimes it's not about what you do, it's about what you don't do. I don't know if this video was interesting to anyone. Advertising and how it goes wrong isn't as cool as talking about the actual games themselves, but I do think that it's just as important. The games industry has by far the worst hold on how to roll out their products in an acceptable way out of any form of popular entertainment. It's crazy how many times it's just done wrong. And I wonder, at what point is it going to get more standardized and people can follow a somewhat proven formula and stop driving everyone crazy, or if that's even possible. I'm curious to know if anyone agrees with me that sometimes silence, so long as it's not dead silence, is actually a good thing for studios to practice, or whether you think that the solution is found somewhere else. If you're new and you made it this far, subscribe and like, those are both really helpful and I appreciate it a lot, and I'll see you next time. Peace.